So here we are at the house of John Boorman, and I'll give a little background about why we're here. One of the great disappointments about Borris being cancelled last year is that I was due to interview John Boorman on stage, but it was cancelled, of course. But what that means is that a year later, here am I at John Boorman's house. And so thank you so much for inviting us in, John. And I'm going to slightly facetious question, but given your love of the Arthurian legends, were you ever tempted to call this place Camelot, or would that have just been too vulgar for you?
Well, it could be Camelot on a day like this, couldn't it?
Yeah, it's really, really idyllic here. John, you were saying that we should start seriously considering doing away with the word film.
Yes, because film no longer exists, except for one or two people who hang on to it, like the Coen brothers, and they can barely get enough film. No one's making it. So I think that we should stop calling it film and call them movies. And we should draw a line across it. And that's everything that was past was film, and everything which was. These cameras are all digital, and they can go on and on. We used to have to, you have a reel of film that only lasts 10 minutes, and you have to take it off camera and put another one on. And now you just slip a card into the camera, and you can shoot for hours. And people have started making an entire film in one shot. It is a kind of exercise. I mean, it's rather foolish because filmmaking is about, as Hitchcock put it, joining together a number of fragments. And I think, one of the things that people often say is, well, I love the film, but it was too long. And I think that usually means that they weren't really conscious of it, but the director had, good actors and a good story, but a lot of dross attached to the film, which he hadn't succeeded in getting rid of. When you see a film and you come to realize after a few minutes that everything you're watching was intended, and every frame of the film is relevant to the story, and not just odd things, it just happened to stick to it as it went along. Yeah, and the heart sings when that happens.
Yeah, so it's a real, it's not just a technological change, it's a thing which reconceives the way that you go about making a film. I mean, it's quite interesting though, you mentioned Hitchcock, because he had to go to some quite elaborate lengths with rope, didn't he, to simulate.
Yes, he tried to do it on one occasion. Yeah,
of making it look like it was, so the camera would always go behind a pillar or something.
Yes.
And then there have been some great examples. I mean, I think the Russian Ark by Sokurov is really impressive,
yes.
And that wonderful sort of German film, is it called Victoria, that begins in a nightclub and then it turns into a heist?
That was done. He did that by allowing the actors to improvise.
Yes, exactly.
So he wasn't constricted by a script, so they could improvise their way out of the situations. And I saw that film, and a friend of mine had seen it, and I said, well, it was rather impressive, wasn't it, all in one shot? He said, was it all in one shot? People don't notice this.
Well, that's a sign that it's worked very well, because if you're all the time just struck by the novelty of it, then it's not working. Yeah,
exactly, yeah.
Paradoxically, this feeds in very nicely, because I mean, just a bit of background here. So I was born in 1958, and of course I saw quite a lot of films when we'd go on our dismal English holidays, and we'd go to Bournemouth or something, it would be raining, so then we'd have to go into the cinema, and we'd always see film versions of, I don't know, like Morecambe and Wise, The Riviera Touch, or Steptoe and Son. Anyway, it got a bit older, saw some films, action films. And then I guess when I was about 15 or something, I saw this thriller. It was on TV. It was an exciting film, had all the components of a thriller about it. There was fighting and shooting. But I was aware that it was different, that it was a different order of experience. And that film was, of course, Point Blank, which I think of as being the very first kind of opening of my eyes to this idea of there being something of this world, the magic of cinema. You know, it was even though I didn't know what was going on, this was my first barely understood cinematic experience, I think. And you've been talking about these films that are too long, and I think famously you deliberately kept what you shot to a real minimum in order to give the studio very little room to mess around with it, to cut things. So please tell us a bit about that.
Of course, John Ford used to foil the studio. When he put his hand in front of the camera, it was the point where he was going to cut. So there's nothing more that they could add. Well, Point Blank I made it partly out of wisdom and partly out of innocence, because I met Lee Marvin in London. He was making The Dirty Dozen, and he just won the Academy Award, so he was in a very powerful position. A producer sent him a script, and he sent it to me, and he arranged for us to have lunch together. And Lee sat down and said, "What do you think of this script?" And I said, "It's lousy." And he said, "I quite agree with you. So what are we talking about?" I said, "Well, the character is interesting." And Lee got up and left. And the producer just said, "Oh, you stupid idiot." He said, I put you face to face with a star, and you blow it. All you had to say to him was that the rewrite will be fine. Anyway, so the producer urged me to get in touch with Lee again. I was very nervous about that, and I eventually did. And I met him 2 or 3 times, and I suggested the way I would like to make this film. And it attracted him, and I realized that it was because, in a way, this story was a kind of close to his own experience, because in the war, he fought through the Pacific Islands, and he was a sniper, and he shot a lot of Japanese soldiers, and he was completely brutalized by the experience. And I think acting for him was a way to recover his humanity, really. And I saw, and he saw, that this story was a kind of parallel to his experience. But he knew much better than I did that it would be very difficult to make this film in Hollywood. He agreed to do it finally. We were sitting in his apartment on this 7th floor, and he said to me, "Okay, I'll do this picture with you, this flick with you." So another word we could use instead of a film, flick. Flick with you on one condition. And I said, "What's that?" And he threw the script out the window. When we got out there, he called a meeting with the head of the studio and the producers. And he said, "In my contract, I have script approval and cast approval." And they said, "Yes, you do." He said, "I defer those approvals to John." And he stepped away and walked out. And there was all these men glowering at me, at this young director who had a final cut.
Yeah, young English director. Yeah. And there you are with this kind of enviable and also, enviable and rather frightening experience for you? Or were you just, like young people are, were you just so confident in your abilities that you relish the like they say about footballers, that sometimes a young footballer can burst on the scene without any fear. So yeah, take us back to what you were like at that stage.
I then started to prepare the film, and I didn't know how to deal with it. My first colour film. And so I didn't know how to handle colour. And because Isaac Newton wrote a wonderful book called Optics, which I read when I was very young, and it had a great influence on me. It was all about light and the effect of it. And I knew that in a colour film, going from one colour to another, the retina was drenched with colour, and it interfered with your sense of grasping the film. So I decided that I would shoot each scene in a single colour. And given the nature of the story, I started with the one end of the spectrum, greys, blues, and light blues, and so going up, and it finishes in a dark red. And so the head of the art department called a meeting with or sent a memo to the head of the studio saying this film will never be released. He said, Boorman has a scene in a green office with 7 men all wearing green shirts, green ties, and green suits. He said, unreleasable. So anyway, I went ahead with that. And when the film was released, it was nobody mentioned it. No critic mentioned it. Because, of course, when you have lots of greens, some of them verging into brown and some are verging into yellow. So they're tones. You get a series of tones. And that's one of the things that gives film a great power, is that there's no disturbance of the audience's retina. They can absorb the colour that they're presented with. So that was the first thing. And then in devising the script, and Lee was helpful on this. Lee never argued about a scene or anything. He always did it by gesture. So, for instance, after he shoots out the bed of his wife's lover, and he sits down and he's depleted by it, then we had a scene with the girl, his ex-wife, who says, he asks a series of questions, he answers them, where does money come from? Where is it? Where is Reese and so forth? And so when we rehearsed it, he didn't ask the questions. He just sat there, slumped, and she just went on her lines, and that was the sort of gesture. So I understood immediately that he was much too physically, emotionally exhausted to ask these questions. So I rewrote the scene where she answered unquestioned the answer. Like she'd say, the money, a guy brings it the first of every month, and things like that. And as I say, he wasn't someone to argue about a scene, but he always made a gesture, and it was always relevant.
Well, when we go back to the script, you were talking about you being, you're this young English director, so the dialogue, which sounds very authentically American, but it has, part of the quality of the dialogue is that you brought that Pinter thing to it, I believe, didn't you? There's that weird sort of...
Yes, we were very influenced by Pinter. The brevity and the leaving words out.
Yeah, and that sort of repetition.
Yes.
But of course, it being America, you don't say, we need to get down to Sidcup or whatever it is. But yeah, it's got that weird sort of staccato but insistent rhythmic quality. And then much later on, of course, I think there's a David Mamet does a version of that, doesn't he, with those kind of repetitions?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's just extraordinary to me, this thing you say. I mean, it's the truth. It's your first colour film, And then you produce this absolute masterpiece of, of colour cinema,
Yes.
It's very carefully done. I mean, the colour of the clothes is really important. Well,
so it gives a bit of a kind of unity to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I had just a lot of luck, really, because, first of all, getting that support from Lee.
Yeah.
And then when I finished the film and I had to show it to the executives, and Margaret Booth was the supervising film editor at MGM, and she had the reputation of recutting films and tearing them apart. And she was a rather frightening character. And she cut Gone with the Wind, So anyway, she sat at the back of the screen, and when the lights went up and the executives got up and started mumbling about reshoots and everything, she said from the back of the screen, she said, "You cut a frame out of this film over my dead body."
Yeah.
They all just backed away,
Yes.
And that was another bit of luck.
Let's go back to the changes to the scripts again. It seems to me that no change is more important than the simplest one that you made. I mean, I think it just couldn't have been a decent film if you'd stuck with the name that the Lee Marvin character first of all had. He was first of all in the script that you were sent, wasn't he called Parker?
Parker, yeah.
But you changed it to Walker.
Yeah.
I mean, what an important change that is, because, of course, it contains...
that walk down the corridor.
Yeah, let's not say one of the greatest scenes of walking. Let's say the greatest sequence of walking in the whole of cinema. Tell us about that. For anyone watching who doesn't know that, inconceivable though it is that anyone doesn't know that sequence, please describe it to us, John, and then tell us how it came about.
Well, it's in the airport, really.
Yeah.
And the walkway. They all thought I would need people going up and down, with Lee. I said, no, I don't want anybody else in it at all. And what's more, all those pots of plants, I want them all out. I don't want anything in the place at all. So it was completely bare, and he wore this pair of shoes. He was about size 14. And he went striding down there.
And where's the camera?
The two shots, really. One was a longer shot of him coming down there, and the other was a closer one, very low down by his feet, which travelled with him. It was the death knell of the woman he comes to see him, this ex-wife. And we intercut with it her being at the fair hairdressers and manicure, because she was preparing for death.
And him in the car as well.
Yeah.
And and then there's that clang, clang, clang of his feet all the time.
Kept going over the subsequent shots.
Yeah.
Then he bursts into the apartment, beats the door open, and shoots out this bed. And then follows the thing I was talking about earlier, where he's supposed to ask her these series of questions, and he fails to do so. And she answers the unasked questions.
Yeah. So one of the joys of arriving at, I can't remember which terminal it is at LAX now, but you can still do that Lee Marvin walk. Those kind of, the walls are still the same. And it's great to do it, but the effect is terribly diminished if you're dragging a wheelie suitcase. You can't really do it with that same menace. But the truth is that Lee Marvin really needed to be carrying a whopping great suitcase because of that phenomenal wardrobe he brings with him.
I know,
he's got different
changing clothes.
But he's got about 10 different jackets and suits, hasn't he?
All different colours,
all perfectly colour coordinated.
So I justified this to Lee and to other actors and so on. I said, well, you could also just see this whole movie that he imagines it in the moment of death. Mm-hmm. He imagines it.
What
it's
about
an act of revenge?
What about a more prosaic thing that he that he actually had a big checked-in bag, but you just edited that out where he was waiting at the carousel for 20 minutes.
It's like Buster Keaton. He had a scene in the script where the hotel's on fire, and he reaches under the bed, and there's a roll of rope which he throws out the window and lowers himself down, only to realise that he's on the ground floor. So the producer said to him, well, you know, it's ridiculous. You've got to see, it's much too convenient. He finds this roll of rope, and Buster said, oh, well, there's another scene where he goes to this hardware store and he explains what he needs, and he gets his bottle of soup and a rope, and he takes them back to the hotel and he puts it under the bed. And Peter says, oh, well, that's all right then.
Yeah, yeah.
And Buster said, the only thing is we're not going to shoot that scene. And of course, that's often the case. When I was producing Neil Jordan's first film, Angel, he had a scene in the car where he pulls a gun on the guy who's driving, and the guy just responds by just driving even faster. Neil shot 2 laborious scenes of how he finds this gun. And I said, Neil, you don't need those scenes. You know, if he pulls a gun, you don't need to. The audience is not going to ask where he found it. You know, and that's often the case in film. You know, people believe what they see.
Yeah. So the morning after that shooting the bed scene, you know, the apartment's been emptied, hasn't it? You know, and we just accept it because of the sort of totality of your sort of cinematic vision.
Yes.
So he goes from Parker, one who parks, to Walker, one who walks, and of course he's walking all the time. And I think one of the great things about the film is that if you ask him at any moment, what does he want? Well, he wants his money. He keeps saying it. But the more insistently that he repeats this quite simple statement of intention, the more existentially sort of vacant it becomes. It becomes almost like you might as well say he's waiting for Godot at one moment. So there is this weird kind of quality on the one hand that it started out life as a sort of thriller, but it just becomes this sort of existential film with all sorts of other weird things going on in it. So another sequence that I like is that, I mentioned 2 sequences here. There's that bit where he smashes up all the bottles in the bathroom, and then we get that rather Roger Corman psychedelic sequence. Do you recall of all the colours swirling in the in the basin? In the bathroom. Yeah. In the bathtub. Yeah. And another sequence, well, just you can comment on this if you like. And I love the sequence that I always think of when it begins with what I call the revolt of the appliances. So there you are, you're in Los Angeles at a time when America's got this much higher living standard than we ever, than you as a boy from the Blitz, as it were, ever dreamed of all these appliances. And then, they're all turned on, and Lee Marvin goes all around the place, turning them off. And then, of course, there's she gets whacked over the head with the pool cue. So I just, So what it just seems to me is that you're this young guy. You get given this script. You've seen a lot of film. You've seen these European filmmakers, Renoir, and then it seems to me we've been talking about the kitchen. So you just throw the kitchen sink at it. I mean, you're just full of cinema that you bring. Anyway, John, so that's make of that comment what you will.
Alex Jacobs did a lot of work on that script with me. And he did a lot of the ideas were his. It was very interesting. In that sequence of all the kitchen machines turned on and working, the MGM were astonished at how successful the film was in South America. And it turned out that everyone wanted to see that kitchen scene. They wanted to see all those appliances.
It's not just that you'd been sponsored by Moulinex or something. What about the particular influences? I think I've read that it was Renoir, any other people who you would really, you felt, enlarged your own conception of what cinema could be?
Well, you know who was an influence was as a screenwriter was Pinter.
Yeah,
and
sure.
and it was his ability to pare things down that was so impressive. And he did all those scripts, and they were very successful. And I got hold of one or two of his scripts, and he was biggest influence really on that film.
I mean, there's the dialogue, but also it seems to me that what's so important is the movement in the. I mean, I go to see a film now, and within about 2 minutes or so, you can tell if a director has that crucial thing of rhythm. And the rhythm of this film is established so early on. There's so much great movement in it. There's the movement of the camera, of course. And then there is this crucial thing of Lee Marvin as someone who moves, as this kind of I mean, it's almost, balletic at times, his movement, isn't it?
It is. And, you know, when he bursts into his wife's apartment and he comes in and he says to the camera operator, he said, look, when I look left, I'm going to move right. So he did this. He came in, looks left and moved right. And the camera operator moved with the first look, the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And he warned him, and he missed it the first 2 or 3 times.
Because he was taken in by the
movement.
Yeah.
And even though he was warned, he got it wrong. He got it right in the end, but that was a typical Lee Marvin trick.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about his movement, but then it'll come as no surprise that we also need to talk about his incredible stillness. There are sequences there where he's just completely immobile, isn't he?
Yeah, so that was an important element in it. I was 1 or 2 occasions where I said to Lee, I don't think you've got to do a bit more. I said, you're complete. The stillness is great. I said, but you've got to show that you're alive or something. And he said to me, I think, John, you'll find in the rushes tomorrow, I think you'll find it's there. And
Was he right?
It was about his concentration.
Yeah.
And it was coming through the film.
I'm surprised you said that he had to show he was alive, because one of the things about the film that gives it its power is the fact that, he actually does die in the first, 5 minutes of the film.
Yeah.
That he doesn't really survive the bit in Alcatraz. Okay, I think we will move on from Point Blank. It was a success, but it wasn't a complete kind of blockbuster success commercially, I think. But it certainly established you as an auteur, didn't it?
Well, when the picture opened in France, it was hailed there, and MGM took them by surprise that they re-released it, and it did better the second time round. But it never was a great success in the box office.
And it's a film that its reputation has continued to grow, hasn't it?
Yes.
And just going forward to a couple of years ago when Once Upon a Time in Hollywood came out, I thought it was because, Tarantino loves allusions and quotations from films. And I thought it was such a shame that during that sequence when they arrived back at LA, I thought it was such a shame that we didn't see a sort of white-haired guy in a sports suit going along, that we didn't get a sort of little cameo appearance of Lee Marvin there.
Well, I said to Tarantino when I saw that, I said, you made it about Hollywood in the 60s, and I frankly didn't recognize it. I was there.
Oh, did you? Really?
Yeah.
Aha.
I was there. He wasn't.
So you did this film with Lee Marvin, and it wasn't just a successful working relationship with an actor. It was, it was one of the great friendships of your life. And I think, did his widow give you the brogues that he wore in that sequence?
She gave me the shoes.
Yeah. And you remained great friends for till the end of Lee Marvin's life, I think, didn't you? And your son is named Lee, of course.
Yeah. Yes, I named after Lee.
But also, I mean, I think you share my admiration for David Thompson's biographical dictionary, do you not?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, which means you must love the moment when he says, it's the moment when it first becomes clear that you're reading a completely nutty book, when he says, the author is torn between his obligation to cover everybody from Antonioni to whatever, and the simple fact that Angie Dickinson is his favourite actress. So, yeah, we've got to say something about Angie Dickinson in that film. Somebody who is perhaps unfairly just remembered as, a policewoman. But it's a great performance by her in Point Blank.
She was a lovely film actress because she could, she could use her voice very well and her face. And when we had the scene where her and Lee Marvin in the house together, I said to her, "Have I gone away with a guy, and fallen for him and you got away with him?" And she said, "Yes, I was." She said, we fell in love and we wanted to be alone. So we took a tramp steamer. And she said, after 3 days on this tramp steamer, we couldn't bear the sight of each other. And she said, so he just sat down and wrote a script. Mm-hmm. And she said, he didn't and he won the Academy Award for it, she said, and he didn't even thank me for being a bad lay. That was a story I've never told before.
Oh, we're glad to have this on record. So I wonder, John, you've had this kind of huge career in cinema. You've done many, many films, but also, of course, I think in some of the books you've talked about the difficulty of getting projects raised. And now as we sit here surrounded by this, this lovely countryside, and you published the diary that you kept during the lockdown. And I thought it'd just be nice now. We started with your first film, and then talk about how you regard your career, and if even at this stage you're conscious of projects you would like to have done that you didn't do, and then also it'd be great if you could say something about your life during the lockdown when you were doing this absolutely gorgeous book.
Well, I suppose I published a memoir called Conclusions, which are in my 80s, and I did this one, and I'm writing a script for my daughter at the moment. So I'm working away. And so far as my career is with Hollywood, it's always a love-hate thing, because when I made, after Point Blank, I made Hell in the Pacific, which is about these two men, Lee Marvin and Toshiro Mifune, washed up on a tiny island, and as it were, not having a language in common, but fighting out the war in miniature, as it were.
Yeah.
And because there was no dialogue, and I was attracted to making that because I have a tremendous love of the early silent cinema, and I made a documentary about silent film, and so it was a possibility of making a silent film, really.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
but with in color with two terrific actors. I had the difficulty with an ending. I didn't know how to end it, and I went to Japan to see Mifune, and I went to see Kurosawa, and I told him the story, and I said I was trying to find an ending, and I said, "Do you have any ideas?" And he thought very seriously about this, and then I waited, for the master to speak, and he finally said, "They meet a girl." And he saw my look of utter dismay, and he said,
was he joking?
And he roared with laughter.
Right. Very good.
So the producers, without speaking to me, changed the ending And I was so upset about it that I went on television and asked people not to go and see it, which they did in their droves.
Yeah.
and so after I made that film, I decided that I wouldn't, I had complete control on Point Blank. And I said that I'm not going to make another film, unless I have final cut. So that excluded a lot of projects where the studios didn't want to give it to me.
Yeah.
So, but I went through my whole career doing so, having final cut on all the films I made.
Mm-hmm.
So it did cut me off from quite a few things, but I felt that if you didn't have control of the cut, you didn't own the film, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. And just right at the end then, John, just say something about the experience of this book, of the last year, your experience of being here. I mean, there are a lot worse places to be locked down, right?
Yes. So the lockdown for me, I had two of my children up here with me, Lee and Lily May, and I didn't have an intention of publishing it. I just thought I'd do it, and I stepped out of my front door there each morning in April and walked down the driveway and just came back and wrote down what I observed. And I didn't think of it, but my neighbour next door, Kathy Gilfillan, urged me to publish it. So she said, if you keep going. So I did 3 months, April, May, June of the lockdown. And it was kind of a meditation that I walked out every day and thought about what I saw, and it reminded me of things. And I made no great effort to make it attractive. I just wrote down what I saw and what I felt. And I thought at the end, I thought it might be a bit thin, but Lilliput put it in this beautiful covering.
Absolutely.
A magnificent product as a book, as a object.
With gorgeous bookmark.
Yeah.
Lovely end papers.
The paper was very good quality, so they could reproduce the illustrations.
Yes, yeah.
And I think people thought there must be something very important in this book.
Yeah, and of course, just in case anyone's not aware of it, it's by no means John's first book. He mentioned Conclusions, but there was the wonderful memoir, Adventures of a Suburban Boy.
Yes.
And then also, I mean, very importantly, you did that series of projections for Faber, didn't you?
We did that we won a year for 13 years. Yeah.
13 years, was it? Yeah, yeah, really important sort of journal. So anyway, John, thank you so much for being incredibly generous with your time. Thank you for indulging me and in wanting to talk so much about Point Blank. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute honour.
Lovely having you.
Thank you.